Hello and welcome to lecture number 69, topic 4.16, Demographic and Religious Diversity in Contemporary Black Communities. There's two learning objectives, and the first one is describe ways that African American population has grown and become more diverse since the year 2000. We'll start with education. The number of Black college graduates has more than doubled since the year 2000. In 2000, 15% of Black adults held a college degree, and by 2021, close to 28% had one. This increase in Black college graduates mirrors the broader trend of rising college enrollment across the U.S., which was significantly influenced by policies like the Higher Education Act of 1965, aimed at expanding access to financial aid and student loans. The graph on the right shows the continued disparities between Black and white college graduates. As of 2016, 30.8% of African Americans had some college education, whereas 47.1% of white adults had one. Though these statistics are from 2016, they reflect a persistent gap that has existed since the desegregation of higher education following Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954. Among Black graduates, 65% of bachelor's degrees were received by Black women, and 70% of master's degrees awarded to Black graduates were given to Black women. This trend highlights the legacy of educational barriers faced by Black men, including higher rates of incarceration and systemic economic disadvantages that have historically limited their access to higher education. As a result, there's a growing disparity in educational attainment levels between Black men and Black women. Historically, Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, continue to play a role in higher education for Black students in America. In 2015, they awarded 14% of all bachelor degrees to Black graduates, though this was down from 35% in the 1970s. HBCUs have a long history of producing influential Black leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., who attended Morehouse College, and Thurgood Marshall, the first Black Supreme Court justice, who graduated from Howard University. Despite the decline in overall degree conferrals, HBCUs remain vital institutions for Black academic and professional advancement. Black students who attend HBCUs express greater satisfaction with their educational experience than those at primarily white institutions. This indicates a greater sense of belonging, academic support, and overall well-being within the HBCU environment. There's also been an increase in Black immigrants. One major reason for this is the 1965 Immigration Act, which abolished the restrictive quota systems established in the 1920s. Before this, the National Origin Tax of 1924 heavily favored Northern and Western European immigrants while limiting those from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. The 1965 law granted all countries an equal number of visas, 20,000 per year, allowing a significant rise in Black immigration. As a result, the number of Black immigration populations has nearly doubled since the year 2000. The two largest regions of origin of these migrants are the Caribbean and Africa. Historically, Caribbean islands served as a key trade port during the transatlantic slave trade, with European colonial powers establishing massive sugar plantations that relied on enslaved labor. This led to large Black populations in islands like Jamaica, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Many Caribbean migrants have settled in New York, Florida, and other parts of the East Coast. Generally, the first generation of Afro-Caribbean migrants experienced more economic success than native African Americans. However, the second generation of Caribbean migrants tends to achieve similar levels of education and economic success as native African Americans, meaning they often do worse than their parents' generation. This pattern is consistent with the phenomenon known as immigrant paradox, where first-generation immigrants outperform their U.S.-born children in areas like education, employment, and social mobility. African migration has followed a different pattern. In the 1990s, most African migrants were well-educated men fleeing political instability and economic hardships. This migration wave included a significant number of professionals, particularly from Nigeria, Ghana, and Ethiopia, many of whom arrived on a student or employment visa. In fact, Nigerian immigrants in the U.S. today have some of the highest levels of educational attainment of any immigrant group, with over 60% holding at least a bachelor's degree. New migrants often have a different self-identification compared to African Americans born in the U.S. In the Caribbean, cultural influences from Africa remain stronger than among Black populations in the U.S. As a result, many Black immigrants do not initially identify as African American in the way native-born Black people do. Additionally, the number of Black people in the U.S. who identify as both Black and Hispanic or multiracial has also grown. Because of these migration patterns, class is sometimes a more significant factor than skin color in determining social and economic status in the origin countries of these migrants. For instance, in countries like Brazil and the Dominican Republic, racial identity is more fluid, with social class playing a major role in how Blackness is perceived. The Black identifying population in the United States stands at 47 million, or about 14% of the total U.S. population. Historically, the black population in the U.S. has been shaped by major demographic shifts, including the forced migration of enslaved Africans, the Great Migration of the 20th century, and recent waves of black immigration from Africa and the Caribbean. After the 2000s, black Americans have been the second largest minority group as they were overtaken by non-white Hispanics. From 2000 to 2019, the black population grew by 30%. The majority of black Americans still reside in the South, with 54%, followed by 19% in the Midwest, 18% in the Northeast, and only 10% in the West. These settlement patterns reflect historical migrations, such as the Great Migration, when millions of African Americans left the South for northern and Midwestern cities in search for better economic opportunities and to escape Jim Crow segregation. The two individual cities with the largest black populations are New York City at 2.3 million and Chicago at 1.1 million as of the year 2000. In the 2000 census, for the first time, respondents were allowed to choose more than one racial designation, which helped dismantle the rigid biracial classification system in the U.S. There are both benefits and drawbacks to this change. One major benefit is that people of mixed race backgrounds or multiple ancestries can now more accurately reflect their identity. However, some individuals may disassociate from their black identity, making it harder to implement policies designed to protect black communities. This challenge is particularly significant for laws like the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was created to combat racially motivated voter suppression, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination in public places and employment. Additionally, legislation such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972 and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, which were designed to prevent discrimination in hiring and lending, could be harder to enforce if fewer people identify as black. If fewer people identify as African American, it becomes more difficult to track and counteract discrimination that disproportionately affects black communities. As far as ethnonyms used for self-identification, black is a unifying term that signifies community, shared heritage, and common experiences. Black communities in the U.S. include people from diverse ancestries, histories, and cultures. In the 1960s, during the Black Power movement, black became a more widely embraced self-identifier. Figures like Stokely Carmichael helped popularize the term, emphasizing black pride, political empowerment, and self-determination. However, the use of black declined in popularity in the late 1970s and 1980s for two main reasons. First, it became associated with the more militant factions of the Black Power movement, leading some people to distance themselves from the term. Second, African American gained traction as an alternative, particularly after civil rights leader Jesse Jackson popularized it in the 1980s, arguing that it was a more dignified and historically accurate term for black Americans. The shift reflected a broader effort to connect black Americans with the African roots, much like often hyphenated identities such as Irish Americans or Italian Americans. Recently arrived black immigrants often identified using both their race and nationality, for example, Afro-Colombian, Afro-Dominican, or Afro-Caribbean as a more specific way to reflect their heritage. This mirrors historical patterns, as early 20th century Caribbean immigrants like those from Jamaica and Barbados also initially identified by their national origin before assimilating into broader black American identity. The multiracial demographic has also grown, particularly following the 1967 court case Loving v. Virginia, which struck down anti-miscegenation laws in the 13 remaining states that still banned interracial marriage. Today, there are over 1.5 million mixed-race marriages in the United States. The second learning objective is explain how religion and faith have played dynamic social, economic, and community-building roles in African American communities. African Americans have traditionally affiliated with Protestant denominations for most of U.S. history, with about two-thirds identifying as Protestant today. The Black Church has played a large role in African American life, serving as center for spiritual guidance, community support, and political activism, particularly during the abolitionist and civil rights movement. Some of the major black denominations have their roots in the 19th century, including the Baptist Church and the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was founded in 1816 by Richard Allen as the first independent black Christian denomination in the U.S. Most black Protestants attend predominantly black congregations. However, in recent years, with the increase in Afro-Caribbean immigration, there has also been a rise in the number of black Catholics, who now make up about 6% of the black Christian population. Religious disaffiliation has been increasing among African Americans. Over 20% now report having no religious affiliation, up from 12% in 2009. However, this does not necessarily mean they reject belief in God. Only about 3% of that 20% identify as atheist or agnostic. This trend aligns with broader national patterns where younger generations across all racial groups are less likely to be formally religious, but may still engage in spiritual practices. As a whole, African Americans tend to be much more religious than other demographics in the U.S. Since 2000, several notable trends have emerged: the rise of megachurches in urban areas, an increase in women leaders, and consistently high levels of religious commitment. Out of the 8,000 AME church ministers, 3,000 are women, showcasing the expanding role of women in church leadership. This shift mirrors the growing acceptance of female pastors in other Protestant traditions, such as Pentecostal and Methodist churches. Surveys show that African Americans are more religious than whites and Latinos across various measures. They are more likely to say they believe in God with absolute certainty, consider religion very important in their lives, pray daily, and attend religious services weekly. However, younger generations are shifting away from traditional black church attendance. More of them report that they are less likely to attend a black church, though among black Americans who attend religious services at least a few times a year, a majority still worship in black congregations. Black religious leaders and faith communities have played a major role in civil rights and social justice advocacy throughout U.S. history. From the abolitionist movement to Black Lives Matter, religious institutions have consistently been at the forefront of the fight for racial and social equality. During the civil rights movement, churches, especially in the South, served as centers for organizing protests, strategy meetings, and training in nonviolent resistance. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, co-founded by Martin Luther King Jr. in 1957, was deeply rooted in black churches and helped coordinate civil rights campaigns across the South. Because of their central role in activism, black churches were often targeted by white supremacist groups. One of the most infamous attacks was the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, which killed 4 young black girls and shocked the nation. Beyond Christian institutions, the Nation of Islam also has a significant impact on black political thought in the 20th century. Led by figures like Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, the NOI promoted black self-sufficiency, economic independence, and racial pride. Malcolm X, as a minister with the Nation of Islam, was a powerful critic of white supremacy and called for a more militant approach to black liberation before breaking away from the NOI in 1964. His pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964 led him to embrace a more inclusive vision of racial justice, but his assassination in 1965 cut short his evolving movement. Black religious leaders and faith communities have mobilized their congregations on political and social issues in various ways. They've organized voter registration drives, encouraged political engagement, and advocated for policies from the pulpit. For example, a majority of black congregates who attend church report that their preacher or minister has at some point delivered a sermon on racism and social justice. However, black religious activism has extended beyond racial issues. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. helped organize the Poor People's Campaign, a multiracial effort that brought together black, Latino, Native American, and white working-class Americans in a march on Washington to demand better economic conditions for all. Finally, the black church has served as an institutional home for developing and debating core values within black communities. These values, education, community improvement, cultural expression, and global solidarity, have been reinforced through church leadership, activism, and traditions. One of the earliest and most significant contributions of the black church has been to education. In the 19th century, the AME Church not only ran schools in local communities, but also co-founded Wilberforce University in 1856, the first college owned and operated by African Americans. Black churches have also been instrumental in advocating for social and economic justice. For example, the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, under the leadership of Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr., fought for fair employment practices and the desegregation of public spaces. Powell later became a U.S. congressman and was a key figure in pushing for civil rights legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The black church has been a powerful force in shaping black cultural traditions, particularly in music. Gospel music, a genre deeply tied to black religious life, was developed at Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago under the leadership of Thomas A. Dorsey, who is considered the father of gospel music. Dorsey blended blues and traditional hymns to create a new, emotionally powerful style of worship music that remains central to black church services today. The black church has also contributed to distinct preaching styles and worship traditions. The style of preaching, where pastors build their sermons to a rhythmic, almost musical crescendo, is a signature feature of black Protestant churches. Additionally, call and response practices, where the congregation actively participates in the sermon, have deep roots in African oral traditions and have influenced not only worship, but also other forms of black artistic expression, including hip-hop and spoken word poetry. Beyond the United States, black churches have supported international movements for justice and equality. In the 1980s, many black churches played an active role in the anti-apartheid movement, organizing protests and economic boycotts against South Africa's racist government. Leaders like Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela found strong allies in the black church across America, which helped raise awareness and apply political pressure to end apartheid. And finally, for the recap, the number of black college graduates has doubled in the last 25 years. Black immigrants from Caribbean and Africa has increased since 1965. Most African Americans still live in the South, though New York and Chicago are the cities with the largest Black populations. How each person self-identifies is influenced by national origin, ancestry, history, and culture. 2/3 of African Americans identify as Protestants, while 1/5 of them do not affiliate with any religion. And finally, Black religious leaders and organizations have historically played a large part in mobilizing and activism. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, click the thumbnail on the screen. And if you would like more resources to help you study, you can visit apushlights.com/AFAM. I wish you the best of luck with your studies, and I hope to see you back on the next lecture.